Well, very good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen, and a great big thank you to Timothy and team for inviting me. I was absolutely amazed. I'd published a paper in a new Birmingham journal called Furnace, and within 2 days, this guy had invited me to come and do a keynote. That, from an academic point of view, is got to be a first, surely. So I really am grateful for being invited along. So as Timothy says, my name is Bob Stone. I've only been an academic for 13 years. Prior to that, I actually ran a virtual reality company up here in Manchester. So it's also great to be back here in what was, in fact, my old stomping ground. Quick introduction to the HIT team. The HIT team, we've been going for 13 years. We're actually very, very tiny. There's only 3 of us in terms of full-time staff. I don't want to go into any sort of marketing here, but this is the most important part of the slide, is that our focus is on human factors, okay? Human-centered design, putting the human first and the technology second. I think that's very, very important. Also, if you ever came to Birmingham, you wouldn't find a hub or a centre or an institute or whatever. I actually said to the Vice-Chancellor when I joined the University of Birmingham that I would not set up a centre. As what we try to do is to take our technology out to the people who need it most, real people doing real jobs in the real world. So we're very, very much externally focused, if you like. We go out there and we try it. If it succeeds, great. If it doesn't, great. We still have something in which we can write papers, and if it does succeed, we have something we can build our research on. Very, very briefly, and Timothy's already mentioned this, we are active in a number of areas, all of which tend to intermingle in terms of sharing technology. Defence is probably one of our biggest areas, and you can see here a mixed reality prototype that we've been developing for command and control, or for example, in Naval Air Command, the command of multiple UAVs. Here you see, for example, some experiment with tangible interfaces using pucks in a motion capture type of facility. We're also using this for the medical emergency response teams training with the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, and also it's part of a Horizon 2020 project. What you're seeing here is, in fact, one of the unmanned vehicle systems projects that we're currently undertaking in collaboration with BAE Systems and the Defence Science and Technology Lab. But we're also very much involved in healthcare and medicine. When I was up in Manchester, we actually invented the world's first virtual reality training system called MISS with my colleagues over at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. And for 10 years, that was the de facto skills trainer for keyhole surgery. And I've tried to keep that going ever since with the use of games technology, for example, you can see on the far left, also right through to the work we're now doing, which I'll touch on briefly in a second, which is working with some of the veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan in order to use virtual reality for both cognitive and physical rehabilitation, and some of the experiments that we're currently doing in the intensive care unit of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital down there. Heritage is something I did up here, and you'll see why in just a second, and it's one of those areas that I love. A, because it tends to keep people very, very enthused, particularly members of the general public, and B, it means I can treat my students, my PhD students, to trips down to Devon, which is where I was born and bred, and I can bribe them with pasties and cider, and they do wonderful results, as I hope you'll see later on, at minimal cost, because unfortunately, this is well funded, sadly this isn't. This comes out of my own pocket, but that's another story. We're also, over the last 2 years, been using drone technology to support our virtual heritage and augmented reality heritage projects. Here you see the DJI Inspire 1, which is one of the systems we've got, flying over Foggingtor Quarry in Dartmouth and a 15th century manor house near Burrowtor Reservoir to the north of Plymouth, using Pix4D to recreate those images in 3D. And we're looking at these not just because it's a Gucci thing to do, but because it's saving us an awful lot of time in building patches, 3D patches we can then put into our topographical virtual worlds. And we're also looking at using this technology, because it's all georeferenced, as whether or not we can use this as ground truth for then being able to build virtual reality models of those systems and use them as augmented reality using image processing techniques. Of course, virtual heritage isn't new. So I've been in virtual reality and augmented reality now for nearly 29 years. Probably, and I don't look a day younger than. No, I won't go there. But it isn't new. And I was fortunate when I was up here in the early 1990s, or to the early 1990s at the National Robotics Centre, where we had some fantastic examples of virtual reality and heritage across the globe, from Japan to the caves of Lascaux in France, to, for example, the tomb of Nefertiti done by our colleagues at Miralab in Switzerland, and more applications or more examples of virtual Pompeii that you can shake a stick at. The number of times this has been redone is absolutely incredible. So it isn't new. This is a very grainy conversion from an old VHS videotape, and one of my first ever experiences back in Imagina in Monte Carlo in 1993, where for the first time we had a young lady in Monaco and a priest or a member of the clergy in Paris actually being given a tour of an abbey that hasn't existed for centuries over what was then the high-speed Numeris broadband, or it wasn't broadband, the Numeris communications link between the two cities. And of course, then we came on to the era of games engine technology, and here's one of my all-time favorites, and it's still one of my all-time favorites. I still think you can download Virtual Reality Notre Dame, created by a sadly defunct US-based company called Digitalo. They should have stuck to heritage. They then went on to design a game, which is a complete and utter flop. But even today, given that this is the first ever Unreal Engine, the actual quality of this tour through virtual Stonehenge is absolutely stunning, as you would expect from the Unreal Engine, with its effects on lighting, texturing, and the whole ambience of that particular application. Whilst I was up here in the Manchester area, we also had a number of early successes, and these successes really have been forced me over the last couple of years, the last few years, to get back involved in virtual and augmented heritage. One was virtual reality Stonehenge, and obviously since then there have been a number of virtual reality Stonehenges done ever since. We've actually done 2 further versions of what we did in 1996 using the Unity and the Quest rendering engines. But this was very important. This was the first ever Stonehenge sponsored by English Heritage, shown at Madame Tussauds in London, and actually introduced to the world by the late, great, and sadly missed Sir Patrick Moore. And that was a very, very formative experience. As was this. It was my little team that was quoted by Salford City Council as actually helping them to win the Lowry Centre bid at the time. And the reason we did this was in 12 days, we were able to put on a demonstration which actually started off in a museum with virtual reality artifacts. You probably remember you can see the old Vuzix type of the I/O glasses that were inside, and could take you into a picture, a 3D reconstruction of a dreamscape based on Lowry's paintings. Now, very, very grainy, 2-dimensional little animated billboards of the matchstick men and matchstick cats and dogs. Okay, if it had been any other painter or artist, we would never have been able to have done this in 12 days. But we did, and it was very, very successfully delivered to the funders of the Lowry Centre. Augmented reality is also not new. Sometimes when you go on to some of these Gizmodo sites and you listen to all the hype that's on the web, you think that augmented reality only happened yesterday. It didn't. It's got a long, long, prestigious history, even before I started getting involved. When we were up in University, I think it's University Road, just off the campus of Salford University, we were developing robots and linking the stereoscopic system of the robot into head-mounted displays. Originally, the good old VPI iPhone, and I have to say that I keep on getting disappointed by virtual reality headsets every time they come out, because we haven't moved on significantly, sadly, from the old 1990s days, which is a real, real shame. But we were also sponsoring a company called Division, based in Bristol. And they brought out their first ever transputer system, which we bought. And we asked them not only to produce this 12 transputer system for real-time graphics, and you can see the quality of the graphics there, they're laughable, but we are going back now to 1992, but we asked them for a real-time video capture board as well, so that we could actually look at whether or not we could superimpose 3D models onto a view of the outside world, in this case a monochrome video picture of the view outside of the National Robotics Centre, just down the road. And it was successful. Pretty uninspiring in terms of today's quality of graphics, but it nevertheless was successful and gave us some inspiration to take our work on robotics and telepresence, which has already been mentioned today, that stage further. So all of that's not new, but so what is new? Well, this is new, and we've heard people talk. We've been hearing people touching on these things in the previous talks. You know, the Oculus Rift, the DK2, the Gear VR. The dreadful Sony HMZ T headband series, the Motive Epoch, the Motive Inspire, the Virtuix Omni, which I've been now waiting for. I don't know about any of you guys, but I've been waiting now for 2 years. And what is new is the fact that we're getting accessible and, in many cases, affordable technologies coming out internationally from crowdfunding sources such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo, if you're lucky. Obviously, you pay your money, you take your chance. A number of these actually go belly up before they even reach people like ourselves. But in contrast to what we were doing in the 1990s, we can get our hands on much more affordable kit now that we can at least use not to do solution engineering, but to show people the art of what may be possible 5, 10, and probably more like 20 odd years down the road, particularly in the case of augmented reality, where, for example, we're currently experimenting with a Meta head-mounted display, and we're looking forward to getting the Cast AR head-mounted display and the DAQRI as well in the very near future, particularly for industrial applications. So the technology and the affordability is actually new and quite exciting, but does it work? Now, I thought I wouldn't have time to give you my now infamous head-mounted display headset Hall of Shame, which I give to my third years as part of the virtual reality and human factors lectures that I do. But the problem is we've been here before. We've been here before in the 1990s, and in many respects, nothing's changed. Okay, the technology is getting lighter. I mean, if you go onto eBay at the moment, you type virtual reality, the number of what I call strapper or hold the phone to me headsets, the Gear VRs, the Google Cardboard, unbelievable. I mean, it's a completely unsustainable market out there, but nevertheless, they are out there. And we can do this you can go right back to the 1960s, 1950s, right through to the kind of things we're getting today, like the Nirvana with its integrated smell system, which is we're still waiting for that to be announced. And does it work? Does it all work? Well, 90% of it doesn't. And the reason why 90% of it doesn't is that it's a lovely idea. It wows the kids. When most adults put these things on, they all say, I can't understand what all the fuss is about. But nevertheless, from a concept perspective, it really is important to keep abreast of what's going on. I'm not at all impressed so far with what I've heard from HoloLens. I'm not at all impressed with what I've heard by Magic Leap. I've seen a lot of computer-generated imagery out there. Time will tell. Time will tell as to what happens. I'm not going to go on any further in this because normally when I start slagging off equipment, people start throwing things. So I'm not going to do that, except to say that there is a document that, if you want, is freely available, which is a human factors guidance for actually using this technology in interactive 3D games and virtual environments, handbook, which if you want a copy of, either physical or a digital, please contact me afterwards and we will send, and then you'll probably become aware of why I'm rather skeptical. 28 years and loss of hair due to headset abuse has made me a very skeptical person, okay? So I long for the day when my next Kickstarter headset comes through that door and I put it on and say, oh, wow. I'm hoping that the HTC Vive will do that. Gear VR impressed me slightly. Oculus Rift, okay, we use Oculus Rift because we have to, not because we want to. Okay, onto the heritage stuff then. Well, I've got another 10 or so minutes to spare. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rapidly go through a number of the projects that we have been involved in, really to illustrate why heritage, from our point of view, and the introduction of heritage into technology into heritage is so important. And it's all about engagement. It's not just about the end users, the museums, but it's engagement with the general public. And that's all associated with this buzzword we hear quite often called digital inclusion. This fact that remote communities, not just in this country but elsewhere, there's this kind of stigma that because they don't get access to technology, they're afraid of it. Their self-efficacy is way down low. What we're finding, particularly with heritage, and what I call heritage on my doorstep, is that by getting people involved right from the start and involving them right through the project, that all changes, completely changes. And all those barriers to putting on these crazy headsets and putting on these crazy gloves completely goes away if you involve them from day one. It's very, very important. So the Scylla was when we first got back into heritage, working with the National Marine Aquarium down in Plymouth in between 2005 and 2007. And this was actually quite an important one for us because we took it down, we took the virtual Scylla. This is using the Quest engine with an Xbox controller on a standard, large screen, where we could actually get the kids to go and swim down or pilot, if you like, a remotely operated submersible to go down on the wreck and use that as a means of introducing them to the concepts of how fragile the ecosystems are. So we actually use this to introduce them to an artificial life demonstration of a certain ecosystem that exists on the helicopter hangar at the stern of the ship. That was incredibly successful, and the engagement we got, not just from the kids but from the public, made me think, okay, what we're seeing here is reproduction of what we saw with Virtual Lowry. Because every time I gave a conference presentation in healthcare or engineering after Lowry, that's the one they all asked for. No matter what their background was, it was always the Lowry. You're the guys who did Lowry. Can we see it, please? And we're seeing exactly the same thing with virtual and augmented reality in heritage today. But the great thing about these projects is that collaboration goes on. And here, for example, is a picture of Wembury Bay. It's virtual reality Wembury Bay, which is currently being used in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital to look at impacts of the views onto a virtual world through a window where the normal views are either non-existent or pretty bad, based on some work that was done in the 1980s by an American called Roger Ulrich, is actually beginning to deliver some positive impact in terms of recovery from trauma. Now, Virtual Wembley, we go down with our drones and we go down with our iPads, and we go down, and the beauty of the things we do is that we get people coming up to us and saying, "What are you doing? Why are you using all this technology on our beach?" And when we explain to them, we get lots and lots of narrative, lots and lots of stories, including, for example, well, did you realise that back in 1909, there was a plan put before the House of Lords to turn Virtual Wembley Bay, which is now National Trust, into the largest commercial dock in the UK? Well, couldn't resist a temptation like that. So my students and I got together and we put together a 3D model of what it may have looked like, including the Titanic, different classes of submarines, and so on and so forth, based on the historical illustrations we got from the local village community. And to be able to take that down and show them what the bay would have looked like, had that gone ahead, unfortunately it was chucked out of the House of Lords, is very, very compelling, very, very powerful. One of the occupants of the Virtual Wembley dock when we built it was the A7 submarine. We've since been working with the diving community down in Plymouth, who were given last year Ministry of Defence sponsorship, or well, not sponsor, permission, no money, permission, to dive on the A7 submarine to find out why it actually sank in mysterious circumstances back in January 2014. And what we've been doing with these guys is taking the imagery that's been coming back up from the submarine and putting this into a package that ultimately will be used as an educational package for school children, including, if we can, some animated versions of these fellas, these huge congers that took the dive team by surprise when they were tapping away on the hull to try and get some ultrasonic thickness measurements. And so there's the 3D model of the submarine in all its glory. And then we have modified this since from getting the diving information back from the videos, recreated it using 3ds Max, and then put it into Unity 5 to get the effects of the fish, the turbidity, and so on and so forth. And that's a project that we're hoping to continue into that part of this year. And then it snowballs, okay? And I'm going to take a deep breath and rush through these, and I do apologise because I'm obviously conscious of time and the networking we have to do afterwards. But as a result of doing that and showing that to the guys at Wembley Village, in Wembley Village Hall, with people as young as 7 and as old as 94, coming along, putting the headsets on, trying it all out, we then get more temptations to take our guys down to Plymouth. So here you see HMS Amethyst, the famous Royal Navy vessel featured in the film, the Yangtze incident with Richard Todd, with Bernard Cribbins, with William Hartnell, all there making their film debuts. And we've been trying to use a marker-based augmented reality to bring the ship back to its final resting place. And the big problems with this is, as I say later on, that it's great using augmented reality in the lab. It's great using it in cities where you've got lovely geometrically defined spaces. As soon as you take it into really, really complex settings, and particularly settings where you've got plants and trees and they all change to the seasons, all of a sudden it becomes incredibly difficult. And trying to use an iPad in bright sunlight or even an iPhone is absolutely ludicrous. So we've still got a long way to go in terms of how we deliver virtual augmented reality experiences to people doing their things in the real world. Again, another example, this is Who Lake in Plymouth, where we've been supporting guys who do not want to get out to inspect these wrecks because the mud is treacherous, and by the time they can get a kayak out there, it's flooded so much they can't get inside. So again, we've been doing recreations of the wrecks in Who Lake using our Inspire quadcopter and the Pix4D software. The Maria, this was a submarine, would you believe, that was launched in 1774 by a guy called John Day. Wanted to spend 24 hours in between Firestone Bay and Drake's Island, again in Plymouth. Went down with these amazing rocks on the bottom, which he was hopefully going to release to bring the submarine or bring the ship back up. It never happened. A lot of bubbles came back up, but sadly he didn't. So again, recreating the ship in using virtual reality, again using Unity, and then using, I think this is Mateo on an iPad to actually visualize. Here we were trying out the image on the left is a fudge because I had to actually Photoshop the image in because otherwise you wouldn't see it, because it was an iPad in the outside world. You wouldn't have seen it, but that's the actual screenshot. And we tried using this with a GPS-based version of Mateo, and it was absolutely useless. So we had to revert back to marker-based AR yet again. James Egan Lane, another good example of a wreck. And all this is we're all trying to move towards a coastal path augmented reality app that will show people when they're walking along the southwest coastal path exactly what exists underwater off the coaster. So trying to make the invisible visible using a combination of VR and AR techniques. So the James Egan Lane, a US Liberty ship that was torpedoed by the U-399 back in 1945, is another example. The Glaucus is something we completed in September of this year. It was the 50th anniversary of this guy, Colin Irwin, who spent £1,200 of his own money in 1965, would you believe, to actually build the UK's first habitat at a time when the Americans and Jacques Cousteau were spending many, many zeros. This is all forgotten there. This still exists, but it exists in this very, very sad state on the bottom of the seabed. Again, just off the coast of Plymouth, nobody knows about it. So we were able, again, using our mixed reality facility, and yes, there's the Oculus, yes, it's got a leap strap to it, in order to bring Colin back and to allow him to swim down to the Glaucus and go back inside his wonderful invention and to revisit it one more time. And again, we're trying to now package this into an app that we can give to school children, at least in the Plymouth area. Virtual Laboratory is the second of the other scenarios that we're using in the hospital. Very, very much steeped in history. We've got, for example, the 1927 suspension bridge that was built to actually raise the dam, to increase the water flow, increase the water volumes into Plymouth. With that comes a number of interesting challenges. Here was one challenge to try and get the augmented version of the suspension bridge in sight, being able to be viewed by members of the general public from the dam. But we're also very, very, very conscious that, again, as soon as we did that, we had people coming to us and say, well, what about the old railway line just up the hill? Could you recreate that? So we did. And there were Spitfires coming from the nearby RAF Harrowbeer. Can you recreate those? Yes, you can. So we've got obviously three-dimensional reconstructions now, again, in Unity of that area. But also, when we get down there, my students like to humour me. And because it's a dam and because there was water, I couldn't resist doing this. You probably can't hear the Merlin engines, but I simply couldn't resist doing that. It was, it's just one of those kiddie things that I like doing. But members of the public saw that and they said, well, what about RAF Harrowbeer? Why don't you go to Harrowbeer and why don't you actually get the Spitfire back, your virtual reality Spitfire, back in one of the dispersal pens of the long abandoned airfield? So we did that, but then we heard that back in 1945, President Truman actually made an impromptu stop to Harrowbeer on his way back from the German Potsdam conference. So we couldn't resist that either. So this summer, we actually had at RAF Harrowbeer during their 1940 celebration, the sacred cow aircraft fly into RAF Harrowbeer, open the door, and one of my guys who's been doing a lot of medical work using avatars, having Harry Truman, with his I can't remember the name of the hat now, but his very conspicuous hat, actually waving at the people at the old air site. And finally, the Anne. The Anne was the biggest challenge for us as far as augmented reality was concerned. We initially did a survey of the Anne using a Phantom 2 Vision quadcopter, as you can see here. And whilst we were doing that, I thought, I've got a cool idea. How about doing augmented reality from a quadcopter? And I love to give my students challenges, even though every time I come up with an idea, they sigh and think, oh God, he's going off on one again. So there's the Anne. There's the wreck of the Anne at Pet Level Beach near Hastings. This is the three-dimensional, this is the Unity version that we were showing, in fact, last week in Dartmouth to school kids with the Oculus Rift. This actually runs really, really well on a Gear VR with an S6 phone. Here we had a few bits of trouble, as you can see, using a very, very big fiducial marker to visualize the Anne in place. But we finally got around to it. You can see myself here with a lady from the Hastings Shipwreck Museum. Here's the Anne, actually in her final resting place over the wreck on Pet Level. However, that wasn't what we tried to do. So using one of my students' home-built quadcopter, so hexacopters, we took, in this case, we took the mobile phone, strapped it to the bottom of the hexacopter, flew it up, and if you blink, you'll miss this. But back in 2014, and again earlier this year, we got 10 seconds of footage from the quadcopter. You can see the real sand of the ship. It's really jerky, but I don't think this has been done before. But even though it was 10 seconds, we were dead chuffed with that. It was something that we're going to try and build on in the future. And we presented that, and this is the key to my talk, the human factor, but members of the general public. We presented that at the Pet Level Beach, and we had individuals as old as 94. This young lady was 7. Unbelievable, the number of people who came in, put the technology on, and all the fear had gone away. All the reticence about using technology has gone because it's heritage on their doorstep. And that's quite important, I think, in terms of computer efficacy and confidence. So the lessons learned. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'll send PDF copies of these slides to Timothy just to save time. I'm not a great fan of putting technology first. You've probably gathered that. I don't believe in the word immersion. I don't believe that we will be truly immersed in the virtual world until we get rid of this or we get rid of anything we have to wear. There are too many claims on the web about the holodeck. Every time I see we are very close to having invented the holodeck, I scream. But I copy it and I put it into my student lectures. We're nowhere near the holodeck. Wearable technologies, only if the application and the human factors dictate that they are totally necessary and safe to use. Okay, that's important from both a virtual and augmented reality. Caves, I'm not a great fan of caves either, but I'm not going to have people throwing things at me. 3D stereo viewing is overhyped. 56% of the population have some defect which prevents them from seeing 3D or stereo at all times. That's quite an important statistic to remember, and it's what people tend to forget. With the Oculus, with most headsets, there's no shame in producing the same image to left and right eyes and using your head or your body movement to get the 2D parallax cues you need for depth and distance perception. Stereo is overhyped. Stereo is overrated. And yes, so again, engage in enhanced experience through good content design and stakeholder engagement, not by showing what I call Gucci interfaces. Same applies to augmented reality. And say it works well in cities and labs, but when you take it into the real world, still a long, long way to go, particularly in registration techniques. We don't know which is the best to go. Marker-based AR is still the most reliable. Image-based AR or image processing-based AR has still got a fairly long way to go if we're going to cope with all the environments that we're going to be putting this into. And again, there are safety issues about how you keep people focused on a tablet or headset-based system, particularly if they're walking along the southwest coastal path. What you don't want to do is to actually go and visit the actual wreck in a physical perspective. So finally, the final slide. I think that virtual heritage, because of all these challenges, gives us an enormous series of opportunities, not just from an industrial perspective, but also from a research perspective. We still have got a long, long way to go. But memories are short. I say we're seeing an almost identical techno-push repeat of the 1990s, which is a shame because it obscures what the technology can do, because people think about this and they don't think about the really rich toolkits that underpin what we do. Too many people believe what they see in the Gizmo news feeds. Too many people believe what they see on YouTube, particularly things when it comes to like the HoloLens and Magic Leap and others. They're not just the only ones. Because I'm a human factors person, I would say this. ISO 9241 Part 210. If you want to sound good in a proposal, quote ISO 9241 Part 210, you can't go wrong. Be aware of digital exclusion, but by making the applications relevant to people on their doorstep, you're capturing their knowledge, you're capturing their abilities, you're capturing their attitudes, and if we work with them, not just at the beginning, not just at the end, but throughout a particular project, I believe you can't go wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for your attention.